Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. We're excited to have you here today. A few notes before we get the presentation started. If you have any questions, we would love to hear from you. Please submit your questions in the question box and we'll be happy to answer them during the Q&A segment at the end of the webinar. A recorded version of this webinar will be available to all attendees in the next 48 hours. With that being said, I'd like to introduce you to today's presenters, Mush Honda, VP of Testing at KMS Technology, and Adam Satterfield, VP of Testing at KMS Technology.
Hey everybody, this is Adam Satterfield here. I'm here along with my partner in crime, Mush Honda. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're really excited to talk about this. This is a topic that is a passion for both Mush and I. It's something that we've seen a lot of the newer folks in the automation world in our teams and in other various organizations that we worked at come across. Typically when we are building new teams or working with new teams, we see that they come across some very common failures with their test scripts. And it typically means that they're out searching for hours and hours on Google or Stack Overflow or various other sites to find solutions to these issues. So what we wanted to do today was to collect what we find are, or what we're calling the common automation perils, and give you some solutions in one format so that way you can have a single place to go to for your solutions. So I myself, I am Adam Satterfield. I've been in the QA world since about the early 2000s. I've been with KMS for about 3 months. Sitting next to me and helping me today is Mush Honda.
Hey guys, it's Mush. Like Adam said, we are very passionate about automation and want to share what we have learned across our careers as we've tried exploring and working with automation tools. So really excited to be here.
Great. So we've got 4 main areas in terms of scripting that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about intelligent weights, Xpath nesting, testing with iframes, and then we're going to wrap it up with compliance screenshots. First, we're going to have a quick, brief introduction to Katalon, which is the tool that we're going to be using for examples as we go through this presentation. And then at the very end, we're going to do some Q&A. I'd like to remind everyone that the questions are actually open right now, where you can go through the GoToWebinar and enter your questions. We've got someone tracking those now. So if you've got questions as we go through, please go ahead and ask them, and at the very end, we'll try to get to those and answer those time permitting. So we'd like to introduce Katalon. This is a tool that we have built here internally, and we have just released last week to the public. It's an automation testing solution that is great for teams who are just starting. It is for teams who are perhaps looking for a framework to use. They're not quite comfortable enough to go to Selenium. They need a bit more help. And Katalon really is that answer. We found it to be a great solution for a lot of our newer teams. You'll see as we go through, it provides a bit more hand-holding for some of those more complex automation scenarios. If you have any questions, I definitely highly recommend you go and check out Katalon.com. Also, we've got a great user community as well that we just talk about some basic automation strategies. So if you get a moment, please go check it out. So let's jump right into it. So first we want to talk about intelligent weights. And weights are something that we normally see the first automation engineers run across in terms of issues. And we even see very experienced automation engineers run across these. And typically what happens is an application that you're testing on, sometimes it can take a while to load. This can be due to network latency, it can be due to database requests, or really any number of things. And what happens is you write your script looks really good, it seems like it tests, and even maybe when you're testing it internally on your own system, it works perfectly. But then when you put it out in the wild, some sort of latency is introduced somewhere in the application, and your test fails. And it doesn't fail due to an issue with the application or the web page. It actually fails due to an issue with the script not seeing one of the elements on the page or something in the application in time during the actual step itself. So you have what's called a false alarm or a false fail, where your test is reported as failed, even though your application may be working as it's supposed to. We see this really in 2 ways. One is where the application as a whole takes a while to respond, and the other is where a certain element takes a while to respond, whether it's a login form, it might be a checkbox, or something that you're really waiting to display or render itself. So we've got three strategies that we see that really help folks make your scripts more intelligent. And by intelligent, what we want to say is more robust, more likely to succeed, less likely to have those false failures. Typically, the first thing that we see most folks try is they try to put in a 5 or 10 second wait for each and every step because they're not quite sure maybe where the application is failing, where it might take the longest. So that can be a lot of overhead to code that into each step. The first thing that we would recommend is to try a global variable. So if you think that your application is taking a while, try a global variable that will pause between each step to give your application a little bit more time to respond. The two that we really prefer is waiting for the page to load or waiting for an element present. So typically with Selenium and also with Katalon, as we'll see, you have the ability to say, hey, I would like to wait until this page is completely loaded before I run a certain step or before I run any of my steps. And the other one is waiting for an element present. So I would like to wait until I see this checkbox or I see this, this field before I want to run this next step or perform this user action. And one thing to note here is using some combination of these together, you may get your optimal solution that way. We're not saying that having 5 to 10 second wait for each step is bad, or global variables using them just by themselves is bad. But keep your mind open. Use some combination of these, and you may find that you may have a lot more successes. So what we'd like to show here is an example of us running the script through Katalon itself. So what we're going to see here is this is the Katalon UI. You'll notice that we're going to have two test cases that we're going to create. Over here on the right-hand side, you'll see that we do have a global wait variable. Again, there's nothing wrong with this. In fact, it's probably a good idea to just try this first off. You may see that you may have some pretty solid successes. With the script itself, what we want to try to do is we're going to try to have enter in a username and password. We want to verify that that text is actually present, that the login itself is going to fail. We're going to enter in the incorrect information, and then we're going to close the browser down. In the second test that what we're going to see coming up here is we're going to add a little bit more intelligence to it. So with this item number 6 that we're going to see, we're actually going to wait for that login message to be visible before we go into our next step, to where we're going to verify that text. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a small pause in the script running to look for that element to be visible. Once it's visible, then we're going to continue on to our next step. And as we see here, when we go to run our script, we'll see a little bit difference. In Katalon, you can run multiple scripts at the same time. Great feature here. We'll see that we're going to run this up with Firefox. Down below, we'll have some of our status messages. When Firefox opens up, what we're going to see is we're going to see some red bars come across to where the script is going to fail because it does not actually see the error message because there wasn't enough of a pause. It happened too fast in the application. So running here, we're actually going to have the application run. We're going to have the wait for element visible, and we're actually going to have a success on the script itself. So we've taken what has been a false failure, and we've turned that into a successful test run. So what we can see here is we see that this step failed because we didn't have the wait. And then when we go in to verify this test case 2, we'll actually see that we actually have a pass because it had enough time to wait. And again, having some combination, as you see that we had both a global variable and we had the wait for element visible, we had the most success there. So next we want to talk about Xpath. This is probably one of the more complex areas for a new person starting out to work in, especially someone who did not come up in the CS world, someone who may not know some basics of HTML. Mush, what would you say around Xpath and Xpath testing would be difficult, and what sort of tips do you think you would have for them?
So the key thing with Xpaths is we talk about it being as the typical go-to situation for being very specific and identifying elements that are displayed on a page very accurately. So that's the positive that typically people are attracted towards, to say, hey, it's the easiest way. I can pinpoint specific elements by using the detailed path that comes out in the XPath, and hence I have an easy way of identifying objects, thus minimizing my false failures that you talked about. However, the negatives of doing that is it's a very tedious process, and as the complexities of applications or the web pages increases, the nested paths of those individual elements or the associated attributes of those elements that are ultimately displayed on the page, they are increasing as the overall size of the application increases. The direct side effect, unfortunately, of that organic growth of the product or application is the added-on dependency on your automation scripts, where you now have to go and make sure that from a maintenance perspective, you are keeping a good eye on making sure that you are pinpointing to the exact specific element or attribute. Writing a test case, obviously just based on its description, is tedious, right? But there are instances where that might be the only strategy that's available for teams, especially where automation is coming in as an afterthought. Another item of a greater challenge there is also not just identifying the elements from a script creation perspective, but then during runtime also finding the elements. Things where they are nested deeply or are using dynamic IDs in certain implementations of applications. It can be a nightmare for automation teams where you execute scripts and then it becomes very difficult to be able to distinguish between a real failure versus a failure that's showing up just because a developer changed one particular ID or changed the attribute nesting for an element.
Yeah, thanks, Mush. Yeah, and one thing that we want to note here is that nested elements that are very, very common on many, many HTML pages. We have an example here taken directly from our webinar landing page where you go to register. If I am an automation engineer and I want to be able to validate that that register button is present or that it's working, I'm going to have to know the XPath to figure out how I can access that register button. And this one is a very, very simple one. But as we go through and we start looking at some more examples as we go on, they're going to be very complicated. And the thing to note with XPath is it's only mostly human readable. So you can't necessarily look at an XPath and know immediately where it is on the page. It's something that you actually have to take some time and dig in. And doing this manually without the right tool is very, very challenging. So we've got two recommendations. The first one is if you use Selenium for your framework or another open source solution, we recommend Firebug. And what Firebug will do is it's just an add-on into Firefox, and it will actually generate the XPath for you. So for example, this Meet Us button down here, here is our XPath for that. Now again, as I mentioned before, not exactly human readable, but your code is going to know where that is, and that's truly the important part. That, as Mush said, that can be very difficult during maintenance, or if someone comes along to try to work on your script, they really can't take a look at this without truly understanding where it is until they actually run the script itself. The alternate solution is to use a tool itself. For example, Katalon, we have an object spy piece of functionality within Katalon. And that will actually generate the optimized XPath for you. You can then use that in your scripts, so you don't have to figure out or really dig in to try to find the XPath yourself. It's really handed to you. So really for XPath, a couple of things for you new folks is go out and learn your HTML. Understand how web pages are put together. Understand what DOMs are. What HTML elements are. And then for you guys who are beating your head against the wall doing this manually, is find a tool and use that tool to really help you, because there's some great tools out there that will help you with using XPath. So next we want to talk about iframes. So Iframes, again, after Xpath, this is probably one of the more difficult pieces for folks to do their testing with. So it essentially allows an HTML browser window to be split into segments, and by segments we mean either internally into segments, for instance, a drag and drop window, or multiple tabs or multiple windows across browsers itself. And as you can imagine, testing across multiple browsers or tabs can pose a very, very big challenge to your scripting. So even though you, as the human, can actually see the text, automation tools really may not understand that what you're trying to interact with is text on a different tab or in a different window, because you may see what appears to be one web page, but the tool itself sees multiple segments of that browser window, and it may not know where to actually interact with those. And so some examples of these. So in Google Drive, something that a lot of us are very familiar with, you actually have the ability to drag and drop files into various folders. And then one that a lot of folks are maybe even more familiar with is you go to Etsy or a similar website, you select some items, you put that in your checkout cart, and when you click on Pay, it opens up a new tab and takes you to PayPal, where you then enter in your PayPal information, and then when you're done, you're redirected back over to your previous tab to complete your checkout. And as a human, again, not that complex, very, very easy. But for a script, it is very, very difficult to try to understand where am I supposed to be looking, what am I supposed to be running on. So a typical solution that we see most people try is that they would try to identify the source and target elements to interact with in trying to figure out the correct browser session. Some tools such as Selenium, they do offer drag and drop to assist with this to some extent, but still can be quite complex to work with. So some things that we recommend, so we've got a screenshot of Katalon here. So using keywords, we have the ability to help you set focus. And really what focus is one of the key things that most people forget to focus on when they're writing their tests. And it actually will help tell you which browser window or tab to run your script on. And setting that manually can be a bit difficult to figure out which one to go back and forth on, but using a tool that has the ability to use keywords, you can do that very, very easily. Another example that we have is use a website such as jQuery UI. One thing when you're doing your automation is try to get out there and in your time test out various automation techniques. Try to figure out, how do I interact with iframes? How do I interact with nested elements? And websites such as jQuery UI will let you test on their websites. They provide you with drag and drop areas, with iframe areas, to allow you to try different techniques, and they'll even give you some hints and tell you if your script is working well or not. So this is one thing that we definitely very highly recommend to go out and take a look at. And there's other websites out there. It's something just to keep in mind. The next thing we'll talk about compliance testing, and Mush, I know this is something that is definitely near and dear to your heart, so would you mind getting us kicked off with this section?
Sure. So compliance really, what it boils down to is if you are in a situation where you're testing within an industry that deals with a lot of personal health information, or in an industry such as healthcare that is more geared towards having the proof of, a burden of proof really, to demonstrate that everything that the testing team certifies for an application, that it works according to the identified specifications. You need to have demonstrable proof to show that yes, it matches the expected needs and workflows. We've had instances where our teams get audited by, FDA regulators and things of roles such as that come in and are asking proofs by the teams to say, hey, here is the requirement for the application, or here's the expected behavior. Demonstrate to us that it works. That's one aspect of what compliance is. The other aspect where it becomes also very interesting is if you're talking to teams where there are issues that are encountered in production, where the site goes down, and through a root cause analysis perspective, it's identified that, oh, it's related to an issue that was or should have been tested. That's when the testing teams are put under the microscope, and we have to then demonstrate and show our coverage aspect. And in those situations, having the ability to show your positive results along with your failure points that were validated becomes critical. In this aspect, really, typically the teams that address these concerns are through documentation, right? And from an automation perspective, documentation does become tricky because most tools that are out there only focus on screenshots of failure points. And if you are in a situation where you now have to demonstrate how you have successfully traversed through an application, positive screenshotting becomes key. In addition to that, overall reporting is an important aspect, right? Because if you listen to James Bach or any of the other thought leaders, people talk about testing teams being able to tell a story, right? And most teams do that through some sort of reporting mechanism. So if we use automation as a tool to assist in that objective, we need to be able to have good reporting mechanisms, especially on those tests that are automated and are run without any sort of monitoring done on them by a human. So a combination of being in the industry with compliance and then also leveraging reporting to be able to tell your testing story becomes a key aspect, and automation tools need to be able to support that aspect.
Yeah, thanks, Mosh. So yeah, and so while that is great, some of the stuff that we find is that it takes a significant amount of time to generate these reports. Typically, when you're a manual tester, you're going through your testing, you can hit print screen, you can use something as Jing or screen share to do your testing, but for automated testing, you have to script that into your actual test itself, especially if you want to script that on successes. You need to script it on each and every success in your entire script. So if you have a script that's got 30 steps and you need to screenshot each one, that's quite a bit of extra additional coding. And then tracking itself is, okay, so now I've got it all scripted, so now where do I put my screenshots and how do I associate them to a certain test run? And then what system do I send those to? So it's very difficult to make sure that that paperwork is set up and in the right folders and sent to the right people when you're trying to do this manually. So one of the things we want to talk about here is using a tool. And this is probably one of the best ways we've found as a solution for compliance screenshots. Again, we're going to show an example with Katalon here. But this can really be done with any sort of professional automation tools, the ability to capture those screenshots and house them into a testing type scenario. Katalon here integrates with Qtest, which is a testing repository, so screenshots can be used with that, or some other tool that is associated with a Jira or an ALM type solution itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at our script here. And one of the things we're going to look at is when we create the script itself, I mentioned before that Katalon has the ability to help you with your screenshot. So what we've done is we've actually built in a custom keyword. And a keyword essentially is some pre-coded automation variables and scripts that will take actions for you. So you don't have to, if you're a beginning tester, if you're someone who isn't supremely technical, you have the ability to select what we have here in item number 9 for each step that you want to just take a screenshot. It will take that screenshot and then put it in a repository. And then if you have that integrated with a testing repository, it will connect up to those as well. As you saw, the main thing for us is we need to verify that certain text is present. We don't necessarily care for the other steps. They're just steps that are really just performing an action, not validating anything. So for us, the validation itself is the most important part. So what we're going to do here is we're going to load up Katalon itself, add in some information. We need to verify that it takes us to another page, grab a screenshot of that, and then make sure that that screenshot is actually working. So we have our run. We take a look in our report section. We see that the screenshot was indeed taken. And now if I am an automation engineer and I want to run this overnight, I have the ability to set some scripts up, run them, come in the next day, and I see that my scripts have already been run, and I can look through my series of screenshots I don't have to try to dig through logs or some sort of coding messages to try to figure out what actually happens. They're there, they're present, and they're ready for you. I want to tell everyone thank you very much for taking the time to listen to us. We've got some time now for questions. Lauren, if you wouldn't mind helping us out with that, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. So our first question is, one of the challenges I face when detecting elements is false positives due to out-of-the-book weight keywords. I've noticed that most weight-related keywords don't detect objects well in JavaScript. Do you have a recommendation to deal with detecting objects in JavaScript?
So absolutely, JavaScripts are definitely tricky, and even when you are scripting with simple keywords like a wait for elements or something similar to that, it may not necessarily work successfully all the time. This is a perfect example where you have a lot of false positives. So what we've sort of identified is one way to deal with this is to create custom keywords. And these keywords can be created to deal specifically with the JavaScripts. And you could create a custom keyword that essentially waits for a page to load that is tied to the JavaScript using a simple language such as Groovy. In the examples that we've got, or the tool that we've used, Adam mentioned Katalon. It's a very good way. It supports Groovy really well, and it allows you to create such type of custom words pretty effortlessly. So that would be one way of dealing with those situations.
Our next question is, what's the recommendation for writing one script and executing across multiple browsers? Like, for example, desktop, Safari, Internet Explorer, etc.
So if you have, one of the ways is to identify the types of objects that are driven or shown on these different browsers. There are tools that are out there that could use sort of relational logic in the acceptance criteria for what has been identified as an object on which an action needs to occur. So typically we use that sort of an approach to be able to establish how the object recognition from one browser can be almost transferred over to the other newer version of the same browser or to a different browser. So in the example that the person asking the question was, I would write something, obviously do some research in terms of understanding, what are some of the common traditional styles of object identification across the browsers, and use that as my baseline to be able to traverse through different browsers and essentially promote reusability of the script across. There are instances that there are certain objects that are just treated and identified differently across browsers. Unfortunately, those would have to be embedded in. You could apply that using an if condition, where you could be specific to say, if you are in a certain browser, only then look for an object in a particular way.
Okay, our next question is, I often find that identifying text in an iframe is challenging. How do you go about verifying text on an iframe?
So, as discussed when we discussed before, going from the iframe, making sure that we're on the right frame where the text is supposed to be displayed, we really have three ways that we want to select that iframe using Selenium. You can use switch to the frame by index, name, or web element. And then once the iframe is selected, you can use a keyword to verify that text.
The next audience question we have is, I understand that Xpath is the best solution when trying to identify objects that are using dynamic IDs, but creating scripts using Xpath takes quite a bit of time. We're agile, and we just don't have that kind of time to spend scripting, especially if sprints are only 1 to 2 weeks. What do you suggest to avoid using Xpath?
Yes, so I think as a testing community, we all agree that Xpath is a very tedious way of not just scripting, but also maintenance for those scripts. One of the ways that we've been able to be successful with it is focus on it more as an overall team strategy, with working in conjunction with developers, where things that are driven by dynamic object IDs, for example, you could work with the development team and turn them off based on the environment that you're in. So like a testing environment for automation, you could have those IDs turned off. So that way you have the advantage of using static IDs versus them being dynamic based on new builds generated. Another way could be you could use technologies such as extension JS that allows you to keep certain parts of the object ID static. So if you have a tool that allows you to add conditional expressions, or as Adam was mentioning with one of the other slides earlier on, where using objects spies that are embedded in tools such as Katalon, you could create these smart Xpaths which do not have to have the entire path of the attribute or the element defined, could help offset some of that pain. But really, as it boils down, it's more of a discussion that you should have with your development team to put it as a strategic implementation, as a process, than something that's driven more by a tool-based approach.
Our next question is about iframes. Wouldn't having too many iframes on the page cause your scripts to run slowly?
Yeah, it can definitely slow down execution. Detecting the iframes is one of the key reasons why it may be slow, especially if it involves, looking for the path. Also, if you're trying to switch between frames, it will slow down scripts. And that's why it's definitely key to identify the iframes to be used in your testing. And one thing to keep in mind is if you're finding this, maybe there's a way that you can break up your test into smaller different test scripts. Make sure that you're validating a true business flow or a technical flow, depending on what you're trying to test. And just try to break up your test, because if you're going back and forth between a lot of iframes or a lot of tabs, I would challenge you and say that there's probably a way that you can minimize that by breaking your tests down, making them a little bit more simple.
All right, our final question is, in a regulated environment, scripts written in scripting language would not pass audits, as auditors don't understand code. They don't know what's being tested. How do you overcome this with Katalon?
So this is a very interesting and very accurate observation. Automation scripts in a regulated environment obviously need to be passed through the auditor's interpretation of what is being tested. Obviously, most scripts are not written in a format that the auditors can understand. What we've been able to do successfully to overcome that hurdle is to integrate our scripts with test management tools. The common ones out there, the popular ones, I would say, like QA Symphony's Qtest, Jira, HP's ALM suite. If you have the ability to integrate your automation tool with such test management tools, you should be able to have placeholders or templates that do a mapping of your automation script to what would look like a traditional manual test case. And what that allows the auditors to be able to then do is look at the run statuses of those manual tests and be able to interpret the steps that are created in simple English as a way to say this is the mapping that ties to the manual, the automation test, and hence we know that this test actually passes based on the steps it's trying to accomplish. So the key there is not to change the style of automation scripting, but more coming up with a process where it can actually be relayed back to a centralized test management tool set.
Great. Well, thanks so much. If you do have any additional questions, we're happy to answer them after the webinar. Mush and Adam have got their contact information on the screen here. In the chat box, you'll also see that we put a link to download Katalon. We'd love for you to visit that link, download it, try it out, and let us know what you think. Again, just as a reminder, this webinar will be sent to all attendees within 48 hours. We'll have both the slides and the live recording for you. Thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing from you again soon.
Thank you, everybody.